At my ex's wedding, his alpha twin asked me to leave with him. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Before we begin today's story, we'd love to ask for one small favor. If you enjoy emotional and dramatic BL stories like this one, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. It only takes a second, it's completely free, and your support helps us continue creating more unforgettable stories for you. Thank you so much for being here. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. We always love seeing how far our stories reach and meeting viewers from around the globe. And now, without further delay, let's begin today's story. Sometimes the greatest heartbreak isn't watching the person you loved marry someone else. It's discovering that fate had been waiting for you in the seat right beside them. The cream-colored envelope arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, resting alone inside my mailbox like it had been waiting for the exact moment I was ready to stop pretending that the past no longer mattered. I recognized the elegant handwriting before I even picked it up. Damien Foster. My fingers hesitated, but curiosity won over common sense. Inside was an invitation embossed with silver lettering, announcing the wedding of Damien Foster and his fiancée at the historic Ashford estate just outside Boston. The ceremony would begin at 4 o'clock on a crisp Saturday afternoon, followed by a reception overlooking the harbor. At the bottom of the card, written in his unmistakable handwriting, was a short message that somehow hurt more than the invitation itself. I hope you found your happiness too. I stared at those words for what felt like an hour. We had once planned a future together, a tiny apartment filled with mismatched furniture, long weekends exploring New England, and impossible dreams that somehow felt real whenever he smiled at me. Then one conversation had changed everything. Damien had chosen ambition over love, appearances over honesty, and the easiest path instead of the right one. He never raised his voice. He never insulted me. He simply walked away with an apology that sounded rehearsed, leaving me to wonder whether our years together had meant anything at all. Time was supposed to heal people. Friends insisted it would. My coworkers believed I had moved on because I smiled more often and buried myself in my work as a children's book illustrator. But healing is rarely a straight road. Sometimes it circles back without warning, waiting inside an envelope you never wanted to receive. I almost threw the invitation away. Instead, I carefully placed it on my kitchen table beside a cooling cup of coffee and looked out the apartment window toward the Boston skyline. If I stayed home, Damien would become another unfinished chapter that would always haunt me. If I went, maybe I could finally close the book myself. 3 days later, I rented a charcoal gray suit, polished my shoes until they reflected the morning light, and drove a little over 40 miles to Ashford Estate. The property looked exactly like the kind of place people imagined when they dreamed about perfect weddings. White roses lined the stone walkway. Soft string music floated through the gardens. Guests laughed beneath towering oak trees, while photographers captured carefully planned moments that would live forever inside expensive albums. I reminded myself that I was only a guest. Nothing more. I signed the guest book, accepted a glass of sparkling cider from a smiling server, and quietly stepped away from the growing crowd. That was when I felt someone watching me. Across the courtyard, standing alone beneath the shade of an old maple tree, was a man who looked so much like Damien that for one impossible second I thought my memories had come to life. The same dark hair, the same confident posture, the same unmistakable alpha presence that naturally drew attention without demanding it. But there was something completely different about him. While Damien had always carried confidence like polished glass, this stranger carried quiet certainty, steady and unshakable. Our eyes met across the garden, and instead of looking away, he walked directly toward me. When he finally stopped beside me, his expression held neither pity nor curiosity, only calm determination. Then, in a low, unwavering voice that somehow cut through every sound around us, he said, "Before this wedding begins, will you leave with me?" For a long moment, I forgot how to breathe. The music faded into the distance. The conversations around us became nothing more than a soft murmur, and all I could focus on was the stranger standing in front of me with Damien's face and an entirely different soul behind his eyes. I searched for some trace of a joke, some sign that this was an elaborate misunderstanding, but there was only quiet certainty in his expression. "I am Julian Foster," he said before I could ask the question that had already formed in my mind. Damien is my twin brother. The words settled over me with surprising weight. Damien had mentioned a brother exactly once during the years we were together, always changing the subject before I could learn anything more. I had assumed they simply were not close. Looking at Julian now, I realized there had always been another story hidden beneath the surface. I know this is unexpected, Julian continued calmly. But if you stay here much longer, someone is going to get hurt emotionally, and it does not have to be you. I forced myself to look away from him toward the ceremony space where florists adjusted white roses beneath an elegant wooden arch. Guests smiled as they greeted one another, completely unaware that my heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the wedding itself. Why would you say that to someone you have never met? I finally asked. Julian let out a quiet breath. Because I have known about you for years. That answer only deepened the mystery. Damien talked about me? Not in the way he should have, Julian admitted, but enough for me to understand that someone good was left behind. Before I could respond, laughter drifted across the lawn as another group of guests arrived. Julian stepped slightly to the side, giving an elderly couple enough room to pass before returning his attention to me. It was such a small gesture, yet it revealed something I had never seen in Damien. Consideration came naturally to him. There was no performance, no need to impress anyone. You do not owe me an explanation, I said carefully. And I certainly do not owe you my trust. You are right, he answered without hesitation. Trust is earned. That is why I am asking for 10 minutes instead of forever. I frowned. 10 minutes. Walk with me before the ceremony begins. If you still want to attend after that, I will bring you back myself. There was no pressure in his voice, only an invitation. For reasons I could not explain, it felt strangely safe. We followed a stone path that curved around the estate's gardens, away from the photographers and the growing crowd. The harbor breeze carried the scent of salt water and freshly cut grass, while sailboats drifted peacefully in the distance. Julian kept a respectful pace beside me, allowing silence to exist without rushing to fill it. My brother believes today is the beginning of his perfect future, he said at last. But perfect futures built on unfinished truths rarely stay perfect for long. I looked at him carefully. What truth are you talking about? Julian stopped beside a weathered wooden bench overlooking the water. His steady eyes met mine, filled not with judgment, but with genuine concern. The truth that he never stopped looking for you after he convinced himself he had made the right decision. And the truth that he is about to make another choice he will regret for the rest of his life. His words lingered in the cool afternoon air long after he stopped speaking. I searched Julian's face for even the smallest hint of manipulation, but all I found was quiet sadness, as though carrying his brother's mistakes had become a burden he never asked to bear. If Damien regretted leaving, I said carefully, he had years to tell me himself. Julian nodded once. He did. More than once. He wrote letters he never mailed. He drove past your apartment after work. He even asked mutual friends about you. But every time he came close to reaching out, he convinced himself that disturbing your new life would only reopen old wounds. I laughed softly, though there was no joy behind the sound. That is a convenient excuse. It is, Julian admitted. Fear often disguises itself as respect. Before I could answer, the distant melody of a string quartet drifted across the gardens. Guests were beginning to gather beneath the white floral arch, and a wedding coordinator politely guided everyone toward their seats. Time was moving forward whether any of us were ready or not. Julian checked his watch, but made no attempt to rush me. You still have a choice, he said. No one knows we are out here. I looked toward the estate. Through the trees I could see Damien greeting relatives with the polished smile I remembered so well. From a distance, he looked exactly like the man I had once imagined growing old beside. Yet the longer I watched, the more I realized that I no longer recognized him. Somewhere between ambition and expectation, the version of Damien I loved had disappeared. Why are you doing this? I asked again. Because someone should have asked how you felt years ago. The simplicity of his answer caught me off guard. During my relationship with Damien, every difficult conversation had somehow become about timing, careers, family expectations, or public appearances. Rarely had anyone stopped to ask what I wanted. Julian's attention carried no hidden agenda. It felt honest in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. We slowly walked back toward the ceremony lawn. Guests smiled politely as they passed us, assuming we were simply two relatives sharing a private conversation before the celebration. No one could have guessed how much uncertainty rested beneath the calm surface. As we approached the seating area, I noticed Damien turn in our direction. His confident expression froze for the briefest moment. His eyes moved from me to Julian and back again, surprise replacing certainty before he quickly recovered and greeted another guest. It was subtle enough that most people would never have noticed, but I had spent years learning every expression on his face. Julian noticed it too. He was not expecting to see us together, he said quietly. Should he have been? I asked. Julian looked toward the ceremony arch where the officiant was arranging a folder of notes. No, he answered. Because my brother believes I agreed to remain silent today. A knot formed in my stomach. Silent about what? Julian drew a slow breath, his gaze fixed on the wedding aisle stretching across the perfectly trimmed lawn. About the reason your relationship truly ended. It was never because you were not enough. It was because our family gave Damien a choice that should never have existed, and he chose the future they promised instead of the person he loved. The problem is that the promise they made him was built on a lie, and I found the proof 3 days ago. The proof was not a dramatic confession or a hidden recording waiting to destroy someone's reputation. It was something much quieter and somehow much more painful. Julian reached inside the inner pocket of his suit jacket and carefully unfolded a single sheet of paper that had already been creased from being read too many times. He did not hand it to me immediately. Instead, he looked out across the harbor where the afternoon sunlight shimmered over the water. 3 days ago, I was helping my mother prepare for the wedding, he said softly. She asked me to clean out a storage cabinet in my father's study. I found an old envelope with Damien's name on it. It had never been opened. My heartbeat slowed as I listened. What was inside? Julian finally placed the letter in my hands. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but the company letterhead was still visible across the top. It was an offer from a prestigious investment firm in Seattle, dated almost 4 years earlier. I remembered that opportunity. Damien had told me the position required him to relocate immediately, and that the board believed having an unattached public image would better suit the role. He had looked devastated when he explained that continuing our relationship would damage everything he had worked for. I had believed every word because I trusted him completely. Julian pointed to a paragraph near the bottom of the page. My eyes widened as I read it again. The position had not required Damien to be single. In fact, the company had specifically stated that family relocation assistance was included as part of the executive package. There had never been a condition forcing him to leave me behind. I lowered the letter slowly, unable to process what I had just discovered. Then why? My voice disappeared before I could finish the question. Julian answered gently. Because our father told Damien something very different. He convinced him that bringing an Omega partner into that world would destroy his career before it even began. He promised that sacrificing one relationship would guarantee the future of our family. I closed my eyes. For years I had blamed myself, wondering whether I had asked for too much, dreamed too big, or simply loved someone who had outgrown me. Now I understood that the truth had been buried beneath fear, expectation, and manipulation. None of it erased Damien's decision, but it changed the story I had carried inside my heart. Did Damien ever learn the truth? I asked. Julian slowly shook his head. Not until this week. I showed him the letter the same night I found it. I looked toward the ceremony lawn where guests were beginning to take their seats beneath the white chairs arranged in perfect rows. Damien stood near the entrance greeting relatives, but there was a heaviness in his expression that had not been there before. Suddenly his practiced smile made sense. It was not happiness. It was someone trying desperately to hold together a future that no longer felt certain. What happened after you showed him? I asked. Julian gave a faint, tired smile that carried more compassion than resentment. He spent the entire night asking himself whether success meant anything if it was built on abandoning the person he truly wanted beside him. This morning he told me he was determined to go through with the ceremony anyway, because he believed too many lives would be disrupted if he stopped now. Julian looked directly into my eyes, his calm voice unwavering despite everything that had happened. I disagreed. Some promises should never be protected if they require people to live a life they already know is not honest. The first notes of the processional echoed across the estate. and every guest slowly turned toward the flower-lined aisle. Conversations faded into respectful silence as the officiant stepped into place, smiling warmly at the families gathered beneath the bright autumn sky. I remained where I was beside Julian, unable to move even though every instinct told me I should quietly find my seat and let the ceremony unfold without me. Instead, I watched Damien standing beneath the white arch, his tailored suit immaculate, his posture confident enough to convince anyone that he belonged exactly where he was. Only someone who had once memorized every subtle expression on his face would have noticed the hesitation hidden behind his composed smile. His eyes kept drifting toward the entrance, then toward the gardens, as though searching for something he could no longer define. "He is waiting," Julian said quietly. "Not for the ceremony. For certainty." I folded the letter and returned it to him. If he already knows the truth, then this is his decision. Julian accepted the paper without looking at it. That is exactly why I cannot stay silent anymore. Before I could ask what he intended to do, an older gentleman approached us with a welcoming smile. "Julian, everyone is ready. Your father has been asking where you are." Julian thanked him politely and promised he would be there in a moment. The man nodded before continuing toward the front row, never realizing the quiet storm surrounding the two of us. "Your family expects you to stand beside your brother today," I said. "They do. Then why are you here with me?" Julian looked across the lawn where generations of carefully built expectations had gathered beneath expensive suits and elegant dresses. "Because I have spent too many years protecting peace that was never honest. Today I finally want to protect people instead." His answer settled deeply inside me. It was not dramatic. It was not rebellious. It was simply the calm conviction of someone who had reached the limit of what his conscience would allow. At that moment, Damien turned toward us again. This time he did not look away. Even from across the ceremony space, I could see the conflict written across his face. He glanced briefly at Julian, then back at me, and for the first time since I had arrived, he excused himself from the guests surrounding him. Step by measured step, he walked across the lawn until only a few feet separated us. No one else seemed to notice. The musicians continued playing while photographers remained focused on the arriving wedding party. Damien stopped in front of me, his voice almost lost beneath the music. "Adrian." Hearing my name spoken by him after so many years felt strangely unfamiliar. I nodded politely, but said nothing. He lowered his eyes for a brief moment before looking back at me. "I did not expect you to come." "Neither did I answered honestly. Silence stretched between us. It was not angry. It was simply filled with everything neither of us had ever managed to say. Damien drew a slow breath. "Julian told you." I glanced toward Julian, who remained quietly beside us without interrupting. He showed me the letter. Damien closed his eyes for only a second. "Then you know I failed you." I expected excuses. I expected explanations. Instead, I found someone finally willing to carry responsibility for his own choices. "My father lied," Damien continued softly, "but I was the one who believed fear more than I believed us. That was my decision, not yours." Before I could answer, a wedding coordinator hurried toward the ceremony with a concerned expression, reminding everyone that it was time to begin. Damien looked back at the waiting guests, then at me once more. For the first time in years, he seemed completely uncertain about which path he was supposed to take. The wedding coordinator gently invited everyone to take their seats once more, her warm smile unable to hide the growing uncertainty spreading across the ceremony lawn. Damien remained standing between Julian and me, his attention divided between the carefully arranged future waiting beneath the floral arch and the unfinished past standing only a few feet away. Around us, guests continued chatting softly, unaware that the most important decision of the afternoon had nothing to do with the ceremony itself. Damien looked at Julian first. "You planned this," he said quietly. Julian answered without anger. "No, I planned to tell the truth. What happens after that belongs to each of us." Damien lowered his gaze, taking a slow breath before turning toward me. "I cannot ask you to forgive me." "No," I replied honestly. "You cannot." He accepted the answer without argument. "But I needed you to know that leaving you was never because you lacked anything. It was because I lacked the courage to question the people I trusted." His words carried sincerity, yet something inside me remained unexpectedly calm. Years ago, hearing those sentences would have changed everything. Today they simply closed a wound that had remained open for far too long. I smiled gently, not with bitterness but with understanding. Thank you for finally telling me the truth. Relief briefly crossed Damien's face before it faded once more beneath uncertainty. What should I do? He asked so quietly that only Julian and I could hear him. I realized then that the confident alpha everyone admired was no longer asking for approval. He was asking for wisdom because he had finally recognized the cost of living according to someone else's expectations. Before I could answer, Julian spoke first. Do not ask either of us to choose your future. You have already spent years allowing other people to do that. Damien looked at his brother with surprise. Julian continued in the same calm voice. If you stand beneath that arch today, do it because it reflects your heart. If you walk away, do it for the same reason. But never again confuse obligation with love. Silence settled between the three of us. A gentle breeze carried fallen maple leaves across the stone walkway, reminding me how quietly seasons changed while people often resisted changing at all. Damien slowly nodded. You are right. He looked toward the guests who had trusted him enough to celebrate beside him, then toward the elegant entrance where his fiancée was preparing for the ceremony. Respect filled his expression. She deserves someone who arrives with certainty, not someone searching for another life while standing at the altar. Without another word, Damien thanked us both and walked toward the bridal suite with steady steps. There was no panic, no dramatic scene, only the quiet determination of a man finally choosing honesty over appearance. I watched until he disappeared inside the estate. Then I released a breath I had not realized I had been holding. It is over, I whispered. Julian shook his head gently. No, something better is just beginning. I turned toward him, confused by the confidence in his voice. How can you be so sure? He smiled for the first time since we had met, and the warmth in that smile transformed his entire face. It carried strength without arrogance, kindness without hesitation, and a quiet confidence that never demanded attention. Because you came here believing you needed closure from the past, he said. Instead, you discovered that your future has been waiting patiently for you to stop looking backward. He extended his hand toward me, not as a command, not as a rescue, but as an invitation freely offered. Adrian, he said softly, his steady eyes never leaving mine, come with me. Not because you need someone to save you, but because I would like the chance to know the remarkable person my brother was too afraid to keep in his life. For several seconds, I simply looked at Julian's outstretched hand. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried none of the urgency, pressure, or expectation that had defined so many moments in my past. He was not asking me to make a life-changing promise. He was only inviting me to take one honest step forward. I smiled softly before accepting his hand. His grip was steady, warm, and respectful, releasing mine almost immediately as though he wanted me to understand that every choice from this moment on would remain entirely my own. Together we quietly left the ceremony lawn while guests remained focused on the unexpected delay unfolding near the estate. No one tried to stop us. The crisp afternoon air felt lighter with every step we took beyond the gardens. Julian led me to a dark blue pickup truck parked beneath a row of maple trees just outside the main entrance. I could not hide my surprise. I expected someone from your family to drive a luxury sedan, I admitted with a small laugh. Julian smiled as he opened the passenger door. I sold mine 2 years ago. Why? Because I realized I was spending more time maintaining an image than building a life. That answer stayed with me as we drove away from Ashford Estate. Instead of heading toward downtown Boston, Julian followed a quiet coastal highway where colorful fishing boats rested in small harbors and local bakeries welcomed afternoon customers with handmade signs instead of polished advertisements. After nearly 45 minutes, we arrived in a peaceful seaside town where children rode bicycles along tree-lined streets and neighbors greeted one another by name. Julian turned onto a narrow road overlooking the Atlantic before stopping beside a restored white farmhouse surrounded by wildflowers and tall oak trees. A weathered wooden sign near the entrance read Foster Harbor Community Center. This belongs to your family? I asked. Julian shook his head. It belongs to the town. I only helped take care of it. He showed me inside. The first floor had been transformed into a bright community space filled with bookshelves, comfortable chairs, local artwork, and large windows overlooking the water. A small group of children sat around a long table laughing as they painted colorful landscapes, while an elderly volunteer offered gentle encouragement. When they noticed Julian, every face brightened. "Mr. Julian!" one little boy shouted before running over to proudly display a painting of a lighthouse. Julian knelt beside him, studying the artwork with genuine interest. "I think that lighthouse looks strong enough to guide every ship home," he said warmly. The boy beamed with pride before returning to his friends. Watching the interaction left me speechless. There was no audience here, no business partners, no family expectations. Julian treated every person with the same quiet respect I had noticed from the moment we met. As we walked onto the back porch overlooking the ocean, I leaned against the railing and listened to the waves rolling gently toward shore. "This is where you disappear every weekend," I said, remembering how little Damien had ever shared about his brother. Julian nodded. "People assume power only exists in boardrooms and family legacies. I used to believe that too. Then I discovered that helping someone learn to read, comforting a lonely neighbor, or giving a child confidence can change a future just as much as signing a business contract." I looked across the water as the afternoon sun reflected across the gentle waves. For the first time in years, I realized I was not thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about everything I had never imagined could still be waiting for me. Over the following weeks, I found myself returning to the community center almost every Saturday, without Julian ever asking me to come. At first, I told myself I was only there to volunteer as an illustrator for the children's reading program. But somewhere between watercolor paintings, storybooks, and quiet afternoons by the ocean, I realized I had begun looking forward to seeing him. What surprised me most was not his kindness, but his consistency. Julian never tried to impress me with grand speeches or expensive gifts. Instead, he remembered the little things. He noticed when I skipped lunch because I became absorbed in sketching. He quietly placed a homemade sandwich beside my notebook without interrupting my work. He remembered that I preferred coffee with a splash of cream on chilly mornings and iced tea during warm afternoons. He celebrated every small success of the children as though each accomplishment were a personal victory. One evening, after everyone had gone home, we sat together on the porch watching the sun disappear beyond the Atlantic. The sky glowed with shades of orange and deep blue, while seabirds drifted effortlessly above the water. "You know," I said with a quiet smile, "before I met you, I thought strength meant never making mistakes." Julian leaned back in his chair, listening without interruption. "Now I think real strength is admitting when you have made them." He smiled thoughtfully. "That lesson took me a long time to learn too." I turned toward him. "You always seem so certain." He laughed softly, the sound carried away by the evening breeze. "Only because I stopped pretending I had every answer. Confidence is not knowing exactly what comes next. It is trusting yourself to face whatever does." His words settled gently into my heart. Months earlier, I would have searched for hidden meanings behind every conversation, wondering whether someone expected something in return. Julian never made me feel that way. He gave encouragement without obligation and affection without pressure. Little by little, I stopped measuring my worth through someone else's choices. My work began changing as well. The children's books I illustrated became brighter, filled with hopeful endings instead of lonely characters searching for acceptance. One afternoon, my publisher called with unexpected news. A National Library Association had selected my newest book for a literacy campaign across several states. I could hardly believe it. Before I even finished celebrating with my editor, Julian appeared carrying 2 cups of coffee and a small bakery box from my favorite shop. "How did you know?" I asked, laughing in surprise. "Your publisher called the community center looking for you," he admitted with a grin. I may have guessed it was good news after hearing someone cheer loud enough for the entire building to hear. We sat together beneath the old oak tree while I shared every detail. Julian listened with genuine excitement, asking thoughtful questions instead of shifting the conversation back to himself. When I finished, he looked at me with quiet pride. "I always believed your stories would reach more people than you imagined." I lowered my eyes, suddenly overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. "You believe in me more than I believe in myself sometimes." Julian gently shook his head. "No, Adrian. I simply see the person you have been all along. You are the one who is finally allowing yourself to see him too." Without thinking, I reached across the small wooden table and placed my hand over his. He looked at me with quiet surprise, but made no move to close the distance. There was no urgency, no expectation, only mutual understanding. For the first time in my life, choosing someone did not feel like losing myself. It felt like finally coming home. 3 years passed more quietly than I ever imagined possible. Life did not become perfect, but it became honest, and that made all the difference. The Foster Harbor Community Center had grown into something remarkable. Families from neighboring towns visited every weekend. Children filled the library with laughter, and the art studio I had helped create became a place where young dreamers learned that every story deserved to be told. My illustrations reached schools across the country, and every time I visited a classroom, I remembered the lonely version of myself who once believed rejection defined his future. Julian remained exactly who he had been from the beginning. Success never changed the way he greeted every volunteer by name or stopped to listen whenever someone needed encouragement. The quiet confidence that first caught my attention had never been about power or wealth. It came from knowing that kindness was never a weakness. One bright autumn afternoon, the community center celebrated its 10th anniversary with a fundraising festival overlooking the harbor. Children displayed paintings, local musicians filled the air with cheerful melodies, and neighbors gathered around long picnic tables covered with homemade food. As I walked through the crowd greeting familiar faces, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the old maple tree where everything had quietly begun to change. Damien had come alone. He looked older, not because of time, but because experience had softened the certainty he once carried so proudly. When our eyes met, we exchanged warm smiles instead of painful memories. He walked toward me with calm confidence and extended his hand. "Congratulations," he said sincerely. "You built something beautiful." I smiled and shook his hand. "We built it." Damien glanced across the lawn where Julian was helping a little girl hang colorful paper lanterns above the stage. A gentle smile appeared on his face. "He always wanted a life like this," he admitted. "I was too busy chasing the future everyone else expected me to have." There was no bitterness in his voice, only quiet acceptance. "How are you?" I asked. "Better," he answered honestly. "After the wedding was canceled, I stepped away from the company for a while. I finally learned that success without integrity feels surprisingly empty. I teach leadership seminars now. The first lesson is always the same. Never sacrifice the people who matter most just to satisfy someone else's expectations." I nodded with genuine respect. Growth had changed him in ways that apologies alone never could. Before leaving, Damien looked at Julian one last time and smiled. "He chose the right person to believe in," he said. "No," I replied gently. "He simply believed in me before I knew how to believe in myself." Damien gave a grateful nod before quietly walking toward his car, leaving behind not regret, but peace. As the evening sun settled over the Atlantic, Julian joined me beneath the maple tree, carrying 2 cups of coffee exactly the way I liked it. "You disappeared for a few minutes," he said with a smile. "I was saying goodbye to the last chapter of my old life," I answered. He looked at me with the same calm warmth that had first reached me on the day everything changed. Without speaking, he slipped his hand into mine. This time I held on without hesitation. Around us, children laughed, families celebrated, and the harbor reflected the golden light of another ending that quietly became a beginning. Looking across the water, I finally understood the lesson life had been trying to teach me all along. The right person will never ask you to become less in order to be loved. They will quietly stand beside you until you discover the courage to become everything you were always meant to be.